Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න. Work and learn. Meet Light Meet Max. සක්‍රිය කර ගැනීමට MySLT app එකට log වෙන්න.
Pears Fruity Pack රුපියල් 37ක වාසියක්. දැන් රුපියල් 145යි.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Wednesday the 14th of December 2022. Missing out. Sri Lanka will miss the intended approval of the IMF by end 2022, confirmed State Minister Shehan Semsingha. However, says will focus on getting board approval as soon as possible. Bigger plans. Foreign Minister Sabri says the country expects to source around $8 billion next year apart from IMF loan. The long term. President Wickremesinghe says that all political parties must agree on a 4-year work agenda as per the request by the IMF.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. Now in your top story for tonight, Reuters news agency reports that Sri Lanka will not be able to have the $2.9 billion loan approved by the end of 2022. Nevertheless, the Ministry of Finance stated that while they are 100% focused on getting the IMF board approval, they are taking all necessary steps to get the financing reassurances as soon as possible. Reuters news agency has reported that the executive board of the International Monetary Fund is not expected to formally approve Sri Lanka's $2.9 billion bailout package before the end of the year. Sri Lankan authorities had managed to reach an IMF staff-level agreement in September and expected to get approval for the deal by the end of the year after securing assurances from Sri Lanka's bilateral creditors with regard to restructuring its debt. The IMF has stressed the importance of joint talks involving 3 of Sri Lanka's main bilateral creditors, China, Japan and India. Reuters reported that IMF's online board calendar, which has added meetings through the 22nd of December to discuss progress and new tranches for a number of engaging economies, has not mentioned Sri Lanka. In response to an inquiry, Sri Lanka's finance ministry said it was 100% focused on securing IMF approval. The Ministry of Finance, in an email response to the international news agency, stated that they are taking every necessary policy step to secure financing assurances from Sri Lanka's bilateral creditors as quickly as possible. IMF officials for Sri Lanka said in email comments to Reuters it was difficult to predict the timeline for the board approval as the process of debt discussions takes time. In the meantime, Ghana, just like Sri Lanka, who approached the IMF for the 17th time, expects to receive approval for the executive board early next year for its $3 billion loan. The country that refused to reach out to the IMF had been forced to do so after increased inflation caused mass demonstrations earlier this year. Ghana is set to receive $3 billion through the extended credit facility over 3 years, subject to a host of IMF management and executive board approval and receipt of the necessary financing assurances by Ghana's partners and creditors. Now, as mentioned before, the missing of the IMF bailout to Sri Lanka by the end of this year was confirmed to the media by State Minister of Finance Shehan Semsingha. However, the State Minister reiterated that while Sri Lanka's creditors have expressed their intention to support the country, he added that they are working towards completing the process by next year. State Minister of Finance Shehan Semsingha said today that Sri Lanka is yet to receive financial assurances from its bilateral creditors. Commenting on recent claims made by sources to international media, Semsingha confirmed that while the said creditors have expressed their intention to support Sri Lanka, financial assurances in this regard are yet to be ascertained. Meanwhile, confirming the Reuters report, Semsingha tweeted that Sri Lanka will miss the intended approval of the International Monetary Fund by the end of 2022, but are working hard to complete the required process by early next year. Sri Lanka has to secure prior financing assurances from creditors, put its heavy debt burden on a sustainable path, and increase public revenue before the global lender will dispense the funds as per the prerequisite made by the IMF. The Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri said that the government hopes to receive $5 billion in loans from multilateral agencies next year. Speaking to international media, Minister Sabri went on to say that they also hope to gain $2 to $3 billion through the restructuring of state-owned institutions.
Sri Lankan officials are expecting as much as $5 billion in loans next year from multilateral agencies besides an IMF deal. Foreign Minister Ali Sabri, speaking to international media, said that the government also aims to raise up to $3 billion via restructuring of state assets. The Foreign Minister stated that apart from what Sri Lanka gets from the IMF, officials are looking at all others, the multilaterals put together, another $4 to $5 billion. He went on to say that the president is interested in restructuring some of the state institutions, and if the country is able to raise $2 to $3 billion, the treasury and reserves will strengthen. Sabri added that Sri Lanka was still waiting for letters of assurance from debt restructuring from its largest bilateral creditor China as well as India. The two countries have backed the restructuring efforts and Sri Lanka has shared documents and data with them, he said. Minister Sabri went on to say that they have made it very clear to the IMF, to Sri Lanka's multilateral partners and to the country's bilateral friends that patience is running out and that it is urgent for the sake of Sri Lankans and the good health of the world economy. The Foreign Minister added that Sri Lanka's economy has improved overall with essential imports such as fuel and food becoming regular.
Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe states that it is critical for Sri Lankan's political party leaders to agree on a 4-year plan required by the IMF and other international organizations seeking to assist the island through the economic crisis. He made these remarks during the all-party conference at the Presidential Secretariat yesterday. Speaking further on the matter, the President said that the preliminary discussions have been completed with the IMF, the World Bank, the AIIB and the ADB, and that the country will have a clear roadmap of the journey ahead by February next year, subsequent to further discussions between international organizations and party leaders.
The all-party conference, organized to find solutions to Sri Lanka's ethnic conflict through reconciliation, convened yesterday at the Presidential Secretariat under the patronage of President Ranil Wickremesinghe. The event was attended by Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, Speaker Mahinda Yapa, Opposition Leader Sajith Premadasa and party leaders representing the Parliament. However, representatives of the Uttara Lanka Sabhagaya were not present.
We had a preliminary discussion with the IMF, the World Bank, the AIIB and the ADB. When they get back to us in February, even the leaders of the political parties of Parliament will also be involved in discussions and the government program shall be shared. International organizations inquired us as to what we are planning to do as a government during this time, and I have submitted our proposals. So by February, we will discuss it, as Parliament will have to reach consensus on whether or not we accept the fundamentals. Representatives of international organizations collected more data on the financial systems of the country, including total debt owed by the banks. With all this, we will meet in February, and then the party leaders will convene to take a decision. The organizations want a 4-year plan, and this means all parties should agree on the plan, as an election will be held within those 4 years. If we don't agree, it will be a problem. By February, we will have a good map of our future journey.
We identified 3 areas. We focused mainly on the land issue, but the prisoner release and the mechanism for the justice for the disappeared are crucial. Second, we said without any major amendment, the provisions in the Constitution and other laws with regard to power sharing must be implemented and provincial council election held. Now, I want to clarify this. We don't have to wait until land issues are resolved to start on the implementation of laws that are already extant. The third matter, which is a new constitution. When you were Prime Minister in the last Parliament, we went long distance to the point of view even presenting a draft constitution. Now, how do we finalize that? And I believe all of this can happen before the deadline that the President himself has set. We can't pass a constitution, obviously, but we can agree on what that is.
After the Indo-Sri Lankan agreement, the Tamil community, they got enough opportunities. Unfortunately, they misused that. So I have the right to talk about that. So we have to start to settle this issue from the 13th Amendment. First we'll start that. After the reconciliation between the all communities come, then we can go further. We don't go for a new constitution because if you want to go for a new constitution, we need 2/3 and referendum. At this junction in this country, it is impossible.
There are two ideas in Parliament now. One is whether to hold provincial council elections or amendments to the provincial council system, the Provincial Council Act or the Constitution through a parliamentary select committee. There was a similar effort in 2015. We need to decide whether we will not hold provincial council elections until an agreement is reached in this regard. We think that we should remove obstacles and go ahead with elections. We will not be able to have an election if we wait to solve our problems through a parliamentary select committee. It is sustainable for issues regarding debt restructuring and reforming of SOEs to be discussed with all the party leaders such as this.
Some other issues pertaining to Easter Sunday attacks, there had been an attempt to confiscate some other religious institutions, properties to the state where local communities are getting a little perturbed because the presence of the police in those places which have been confiscated. We appeal to you to look at a way of resolving it with the local religious leaders in the area, not the properties owned by Zaharan and his group, but there are other places of worship that are to be confiscated.
Now, the Ceylon Electricity Board, the Sustainable Energy, along with the Ministry of Finance, have discussed methods on renewable energy proposals that have been put forward to the Board of Investment so far. They expect to give approval to a host of proposals that were put forward to the BOI within a week. Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara today discussed with officials of his ministry the foreign direct investment proposals received by the Board of Investment for the energy sector. Following this meeting, the minister said that other potential renewable energy projects, refineries, tariff formulas and industrial electricity pricing were also discussed. The minister also held discussions with officials from the International Finance Corporation on financial and technical assistance for renewable energy projects implemented by the private sector. The discussion also focused on tariff policies and formulas, potential wind energy, floating solar and LNG supply as well. Welcome back. Now, the Court of Appeal has issued an interim order suspending the inclusion of doctors and specialist doctors in the Gazette notification on the compulsory retirement of government sector employees. Accordingly, the compulsory retirement age of 60 will not be enforced on doctors and specialist doctors until the 25th of January next year. The interim order was issued after taking into consideration a writ application filed by 176 specialist doctors. Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, in his capacity as the Minister of Public Administration, Home Affairs, Provincial Councils and Local Government, issued an extraordinary Gazette notification on the 5th of December, making it compulsory for public sector employees to retire by the age of 60 years. As per the communiqué, the compulsory retirement age of government workers is slated to be effective from the 1st of January next year. Now, the World Food Programme's Executive Board approved Sri Lanka's country strategic plan for the period between 2030 and December 2027, valued at $74.87 million. Now, the WFP also appreciated the Sri Lankan government's efforts towards achieving food security and its commitment to cooperate with achieving the agenda for 2030 and sustainable development goals.
The World Food Programme Sri Lanka Country Strategic Plan will be effective from January 2023 and is aligned with the National Policy Framework and consistent with the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework 2023 to 2027. The plan is designed to support the country in achieving food security and improved nutrition by 2030 in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. The World Food Programme appreciated the government's commitment towards achieving food security and improved nutrition and to cooperate with achieving the Agenda for 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. Executive Director of the World Food Programme in Rome, David M. Beasley, said the World Food Programme's Executive Board approved Sri Lanka's country strategic plan at the second regular session to assist Sri Lanka's national efforts through food assistance in the short term, while restoring and improving food security and nutrition by developing in-country capacity to reduce vulnerability levels. WFP's David Beasley, in writing to President Ranil Wickremesinghe, added that the World Food Programme will provide technical assistance and policy advice to help maximize the return on government's investment in food security and nutrition.
Now in your business news, the ASPI closed in green today as a result of price gains in counters such as Lanka IOC, DFCC Bank and the Hatton National Bank, with the turnover crossing 3.5 billion rupees. The ASPI was up 0.44% at 8,870.63 from yesterday's 8,832.14. A similar behavior was witnessed in the S&P SL20, which closed 0.74% higher at 2,840.56. Crossings were witnessed in Expo Lanka Holdings, accounting for 41.6% rather of the turnover. Mixed interest was observed in Lanka IOC, First Capital Treasuries and First Capital Holdings, whilst retail interest was noted in LOLC, Finance, Brown's Investments and he said Business Solutions. Furthermore, foreigners remained as active closing as net buyers. The transportation sector, meanwhile, was the top contributor to the market turnover, whilst the sector index gained 0.36%. The share price of Expo Lanka Holdings increased by 0.36% to close at 207 rupees and 50 cents. The energy sector was the second highest contributor to the market turnover, as the sector increased by 4.89%. The share of Lanka IOC gained 5.26% to close at 240 rupees and 25 cents. Now let's take a look at how the rupee traded against other major currencies in the world. Norwegian stocks advanced today as bonds were firm and the dollar nursed losses after data showed US consumer prices barely rose in November, stoking hopes of inflation has peaked and interest rates increased will slow and eventually stop in 2023. However, nervousness about policymakers' next move kept the mood in check ahead of the Federal Reserve's meeting today and central bank meetings in Britain and Europe tomorrow. Investors are also turning watchful on the global economy despite China's reopening from tight COVID restrictions. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan rose 1%. The index is up 1.2% so far this year. Japan's Nikkei was up 0.78%, while Australian shares advanced 0.67%. China and Hong Kong stocks also jumped today as easing COVID-19 curbs and refocus on economic growth underpin sentiment. China's blue chip CSI 300 index rose 0.3%, while the Hang Seng index climbed 0.89%. European markets were also set for a higher open, with pan-region Euro Stoxx 50 futures up 0.15%, German DAX futures flat and FTSE futures rising 0.05%. Meanwhile, in the US, Wall Street surged overnight before powering gains to leave the S&P 500 up 0.7% at the close. The index was up nearly 2.8% at one stage, while the Nasdaq closed as much as 3.8% before closing 1% higher. The dollar, which is falling from 20-year highs as US interest rate expectations retreat, dropped broadly and sharply, while bonds rallied. The US dollar index, which tracks the greenback against a basket of currencies of other major trading partners, fell to a 6-month low of 103.57 before steadying at 104.4. It is more than 9% from a 2-decade high made in September. Futures pricing shows markets expect the Fed will slow pace of hikes, but still raise the funds rate target range by 50 basis points to between 4.25% and 4.5% later on Thursday. Now, oil prices fell today after industry data showed a surprise build in US crude inventories against analyst forecasts of a decline, reinforcing fears about weakening demand even as supply tightens. The fall in prices came as the OPEC Plus forecast robust growth in oil demand in the upcoming year, following the loosening of Chinese travel restrictions.
Brent crude futures dropped 0.2% to $80.50 per barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell 0.2% to $75.05. US crude inventories rose by about 7.8 million barrels in the week to 9th of December, according to market sources citing data from the American Petroleum Institute, while analysts polled by Reuters had expected a 3.6 million barrel drop in stocks. The inventory data dampened bullish sentiment that sent the market 3% up in the previous session on hopes of a revival in Chinese demand with the easing of COVID-19 restrictions and for a weakening dollar after data showed US inflation subsiding. Road and air traffic in China has rebounded sharply, according to data from the Transport Ministry, travel analytics firms and energy consultancies, boosting the outlook for fuel demand. OPEC Plus said in its latest monthly report that it is expecting to see a robust global oil demand growth in 2023, with potential economic upside coming from relaxation of China's COVID-19 related policies.
And that's all the news we have for this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.